All right, call the meeting to order. Would all who wish join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, for once, I don't believe there are any agenda adjustments. Did you have any?
I do not.
Anybody else have any? Okay. Next up is minutes. I would make a motion to approve the minutes for September 4th as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion or corrections? Okay. All those in favor? Next up is warrants. I would make a motion to approve warrants for payroll 5, payroll 6, payroll 7, and main purse for September 2018. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Is there any public comment? Next up is acknowledgements. Anything you want to acknowledge, Jeff?
Sure. I'd like to acknowledge the whole community at Asa Adams, the teachers, the parents, the students for a wonderful open house and beginning of the year. Thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge Angie Coltara for organizing the painting of the doors at the high school and middle school. She did a really great job getting people in on that.
Nothing at this time.
I'm going to pass as well. Are you going to do the donation, Meredith?
Sure. So I have a couple of items. I just want to add to something Aaron just mentioned. I called them the Painting Brigade, led by Angie Catala. She reached out to me and asked if we would accept volunteer help to paint a lot of the exterior doors. We did work this summer painting the main entrance doors, but there are a lot of doors around our buildings, and so
There's 40.
About 40 doors, and so Angie Catala led that group, and Aaron Ellis was a volunteer on the crew, Len King, Stacy Newman, and Ellen White. So we appreciate those volunteers and their contribution to the beautification of our exterior at the middle school and high school. Also want to recognize Eli McGill. Eli was recently named a National Merit Scholar semifinalist in the National Merit Scholarship competition, and congratulations for that wonderful accomplishment. Eli moves forward in the competition now, and it's a tremendous honor. Maybe he knows, or Mr. Rulin, it's something like across the nation, an incredible number of high school students are narrowed down to a very small number at this point. I want to say it's like, 15 or 16,000 at this level, and then it goes down significantly each round, but congratulations on this achievement. And I know that in Mr. Rulin's report, he had mentioned this as well as another student. I'll let you finish that in your report. Also, we want to acknowledge, it was in the printed agenda, we received a donation from the class of 1967 of $150 for the library at the middle high school. And this was different from the one we acknowledged at the last meeting, but very similar in nature. They had a reunion this summer, and this was the donation that they made as a result of their reunion proceeds. So thank you to that class.
I guess I just want to say the painting was quite impressive. I saw them out there even in the rain. It was really appreciated because those doors were kind of getting pretty ugly.
Sure, I have several items to just report to you on tonight. One that we really haven't talked about, I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is happening last. I almost don't want to mention it to give us any kind of bad luck this month, but a year ago this month, we had the windstorm that did some damage to our property. And one of the principal areas that was damaged, actually at a total loss, was our ropes course. And the ropes course, we filed an insurance claim and did receive some compensation for that loss. It just came in, I want to say, the end of August, right, Lynn? In the past month, we've received that compensation. Brent Fournier and Leslie Winchester have been working together to kind of plan for the replacement of the course, which has been on site since the early 2000s. So it's something that we definitely have used for a long time and want to replace. It's a part of our curricular program. So we have plans to replace that hopefully before the ground freezes. What has slowed us up just a little bit is our 6F discovery that we had. So there doesn't appear to be any problem with that according to our attorney. We just have to get the state to say, yes, that's an acceptable use of this protected land. It seems to be in the spirit of the 6F whole program, so I don't think it'll be a problem. It's just if we can get it approved in time to get the installation done. It is being moved, though, onto our property. The town just asked, since ropes course was installed when we were a municipal school district, and it was further back, which on land that is now owned by the town and maintained by the town. So they've just asked if we can put it closer in on our parcel, which makes sense programmatically as well. So we're moving it to the wooded area adjacent to the high school or to the football field area. It works nicely along that little tree line there. So we hope to have it installed so that we can have it for the spring season. It probably will not be installed in time to do much in the fall with it. So the payment from insurance covered the majority of the cost, but we did budget some in our current year budget to contribute to that. So we're going to have to pull from that money as well. Also, we have a professional development day coming up next week. Just a reminder, we shifted our calendar a bit to move this day after the Indigenous Peoples holiday rather than before. Usually it's the Friday before, now it's the Tuesday after. We have really two strands happening that day. One session is going to be a Writing to Learn training that was brought to us really by the high school English department. They've been doing a lot of work with Bard College with a writing institute they have there, and their Bard College is coming on site to do a training for 15 of our staff. So they'll be involved in that all day. The remaining staff will spend the morning in a work session on social emotional learning. And then after that, they're going into school-based sessions to do school-based work around curriculum and some professional development in other areas. But with the with ASA and middle, they have all of their staff there so they can do some curriculum sessions. With the high school, they have a lot of their staff in the writing training, so they're doing some other things in the afternoon. So that's the 9th. I want to just acknowledge publicly, you all at the last board meeting authorized us to use the 2-day memo approach to hire for the Orono High School Social Studies position. So we did do that over this time since our last meeting, and we hired Kenya Edwards, and she has been subbing in that position throughout the start of this year, and it was a very smooth transition, and she's very happy to be permanently in that position for this year. So just acknowledge that that was carried through. And finally, we have kind of a preliminary enrollment report to share with you. I know it's October 2nd. We should have a final enrollment summary, but it's not that simple in kinds of the numbers I'm trying to give you. So they're right now working through lots of data to ensure that what we're uploading to the state is accurate in terms of residency and which kids are on supers agreements, which kids are tuition, which kids are resident, all of that. So our overall numbers are 781. That's about 12 down from last year's October count. tuition, though, is 9 more than we budgeted for, that's always a bit of a guessing game. It's educated guessing, but it's somewhat forecasting, I should say. So to be 9 over what we forecasted is positive, and we're pleased with that. The freshman class in particular, they were 3 higher than we projected. We projected 25 tuition students in the freshman class. That number was 28. We had some differences in other places. We have 3 more K through 8 tuition students than we projected, that's not a typical place where we receive tuition numbers and the numbers that we have there. And one area of note that we were further down that kind of contributed, I would say, to the overall tuition drop, or not tuition drop, enrollment drop. Our enrollment of international students is down somewhat from what we anticipated. I think Lynn thought we projected 9. Does that sound right, Reg? And we have 6. So, one thing that, Mackenzie's traveling right now, and I think it would be good for us just to talk about what she's seeing and hearing as she does her travels around the kind of the climate of recruiting and how that's being received internationally. So that was a change that was unexpected. So we'll have a better breakdown. If not the next meeting, the first meeting in November, we'll give you all of this in writing, and also probably the special ed numbers at that time as well. So, any questions?
We'll move on to principal reports. You want to start, Darren?
Curriculum, social studies, and so on. Oh, here we are. Thank you, Sean. And what I've found is that they actually favor the idea of information shared via email and so on. In other words, I'm really trying to condense how we operate, and I think it's working. I'm getting some, at least informal, good feedback. I would also mention that our open house, which was mentioned here, I think was an extraordinary success. Approximately 97% turnout per teacher. It's a little tough to gauge because of specialists and so on, but I think we're in the ballpark there. And I must remark upon their culture of creativity. The teachers did a marvelous job of developing all kinds of, we would call them anticipatory sets or hooks for parents as well as students, everything from scavenger hunts to building projects. It was really marvelous. In terms of collaboration with families, the PTO has conducted 2 volunteer training sessions for adults on September 6th and on the 10th. That's morning and night. We now have a total of 50 volunteers, which to me is extraordinary. And about half of them have gone through the criminal history record check, CHRC, from the state. We've also been working on the media release forms to ensure it's kind of a triple vetted process, because in this age of social media, we are trying to be sure that students who are, I'm trying to update the web page and so on, we want to be sure that students who are featured there should be there. And so it's a shared drive between Mia Caballero, myself, and Diana Smart. We can do a final check through my administrative assistant as well, Kate Crane. And in terms of a vision of academic learning, this one does go on a bit. I'm just going to focus for the moment on grades 3 through 5. They're examining the Elevate Science curriculum to avoid subject overlap and utilize technology with linked simulations and align teaching with the state national standards more effectively. And this also aligns with our universal design for learning emphasis, which is something I would like to see very much emerge, or re-emerge, I should say, because it's really terrific stuff. Kudos to Sarah Kreutz, who in grade 3, who really orchestrated the upcoming webinars, and we're flipping that one day to be sure that the teachers, the learners, are getting adequate training. We have also been implementing our Habits of Mind schedule, and again, I think with great success. You can see the trimesters here. Trimester 1, which we're still in, is creating, imagining, and innovating. And we will dovetail many of these habits of mind into a district-level social emotional learning framework, we hope in an organic fashion on October 9th for the district, or with the district, I should say. Professional development efforts, I think you can read for yourself. Marvelous people who were involved in any number of pursuits. I myself will be attending the annual Actum Conference next week to bolster STEM-related constructs at ASA. And our Fab Lab is up and running, as we mentioned. Circuit kits have arrived, and students will be using developmentally appropriate coding systems. This also coincides with the development of an after-school coding club, which I think you may hear about or will hear about shortly. And finally, student achievement, or almost finally, NWEAs, that's Northwest Educational Assessments, are scheduled to begin on October 16th. That will comprise part of our professional development day with the district. And I just submitted all the paperwork for the NAEP assessment as well, which doesn't happen until, sometime between January 28th and March 8th. That's just for grade 4 in mathematics. Lastly, we've had a little discussion with the staff regarding food and celebrations in classroom in view of safety and religious concerns that people come in often bringing things from home, and we want to be sure that everything is safe and accounted for. I sent out a survey today, quantitative and qualitative in nature, to get a sense of people's comfort level, and this is really to develop a practical protocol or procedure so that we know that all students are safe and that we are meeting the needs of the community. Any questions?
I had just one quick
comments?
one, and lots of great stuff going on. Just the testing. I know we always get pushback about why so many tests. And in this case, the answer is partly because we don't have any choice because the federal government said so. But are we communicating that to parents?
We are. We will be sending out a notification for both the NWEAs and the NAEP assessments in advance. That will be actually going out just early next week. I've got the letter on my desk as well. We do actually look at this, and it has a fairly high level of, I think, reliability in terms of all the assessments we have to take, so it's a good thing to focus on. It also does factor in, I would love for it to factor into evaluations, but they just end too quickly for us to feasibly do that. But yes, communication is important about that.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I would just say that the NAEP testing, that communication probably is not going out.
Not for a while.
Right, a little closer to that time, they'll send us a whole set of materials, and
NWEA for clarification, yes. Absolutely. And we, my understanding is the way they do it here, it's going to be a little different with the Fab Lab, but we administer this with the teachers. Diana Smart will be validating all the students next week during the professional development day. And it's really just a review to make sure. It's an online assessment, so people get a little edgy about that at first, but once you're in, and that's it.
Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
All right. Heath, I know you were running to get here from the school, but with some other commitments, but you ready to go?
I am here and ready to go. Okay, I'd like to publicly recognize our students of the month for September. 6th grade is Mason Hardery. 7th grade is Joseph Bean. In 8th grade, we have Alex Hutchinson, so congratulations to them. It's quite the honor. A couple things, collaboration with families. It took a little bit longer than I wanted, but I think most of you received our first OMS news. Again, that's something we really like to get out bi-weekly with some upcoming dates and just basically what's happening at the middle school. So that was this past Friday, and you'll see something there. It says Remind 101. This is actually, I got to give credit to Meredith on this one. Trying to improve the communication with parents, especially revolving around athletics. If a game is canceled tonight, what is the best way to do that? Having kids run out of the office and call parents, or maybe something as simple as this here. I hadn't heard of it before. So we currently have 2 of our coaches piloting it right now. They picked it up pretty easily. I don't know if any of you got any messages tonight. And then if all goes well, I'd like to really start this with all of our school teams, starting with this winter. A couple things I want to highlight and talk about. We just, Meredith had just mentioned NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. We do have our date. That is February 8th. It's actually not as big of a time commitment that I thought. It said in the letter that I received, I think it says something like 44 students. Well, we have 47 8th graders, so that's the majority of our class. So I'm curious to see, once they see our numbers, if it's going to be a little bit lower. And as you can see, it really doesn't take that much time. And as Meredith had said, we do receive some information. The state will be reaching out to me early December just to talk about how it's going to run. They actually run the whole thing. I give them everything that they need. They come in and they take care of it. And as after Christmas break, I think there's an actual letter that they give us that goes out. And of course, I'll be advertising it through our newsletter. And as we get closer, I'll even do a phone message that will go out just to our 8th grade parents, because it'll only be affecting our 8th grade students. I wanted to, you'll see if you scroll down to 2018-2019 OMS building goals. What I'd like to do is every time I have a report, I'd like to kind of update you where I am with that. And as you can see, I have the K through 8 social emotional alignment. As you've heard, we're doing something with that coming up on 10-9 as an entire district. So I will update you with that as we go throughout the year. I don't want to spend much time on that now. You'll see goal 2 and goal 3, some pretty big ones that we're actually going to touch base on 10-9 in the afternoon when we come back to the middle school. And that's the 6 through 8 social studies curriculum map. Right now, our 7th grade social studies curriculum is pretty strong as far as the way it's laid out. It ties nicely into what we do at ASA and then at the high school. A nice spiraling effect. However, the 6th and 8th grade, they're right on par. However, we need to make sure that we have that in our map, and I say right on par, but to make sure we are on par. So that's a work in progress. We've already started talking about that at our social studies department meetings, and we're going to spend some time on the 9th doing that. And then we've had some good conversations with student growth within mathematics, meeting that projected goal, especially with our 6th and 7th grade. We've talked about doing some exciting stuff. I'm not going to say anything yet. I'm going to see if we can make it happen, but I can tell you on the 9th, one thing we're definitely going to do. We have 3 hours together. We're going to start spending some time now that NOEA is done and really diving into that data and see where there's some places that we can improve upon. The Orono Middle School partnerships with that is something that is a priority of mine this year. I just haven't had much time to do it. The teachers, like I said, the last report have given me information as far as what they would love to see or to get help from the university. So currently working on that as well. As you can see, we've been very busy at Orono Middle School as far as with the pool, the Vernell pools. First time I'd ever been there, didn't even know that existed back there. And the Orono Bog, I didn't get a chance to go there. And then there was a visit to the forest, and then moving down onto professional development. We are very, very, very busy when it comes to professional development at our school. I'm not going to spend much time with that now. However, as this, we don't just, and the thing is at the middle school, we don't just go to workshops. We bring that information back. We share a lot of that within our grade level meetings as well as our staff meetings. So as some of this stuff and the information is shared with our staff, I'll give you a little bit more information as far as what you see there and what we're doing with it in the middle school. I talked about the 9th, the workshop. Very much looking forward to that. Upcoming professional development, so you can see what we're doing. Oh, I did want to back up. If you look at the first one where it says OMS professional development, well, I think there's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 7 professional development days, or 7 hours, if you want to look at it that way. Again, these here were decided upon in our department head meetings, and basically talked about what is it that you need, what is it that you'd like to spend more time on, and this is what we've come up with. Because I want to make sure it's authentic and it's something that they want to do, and they are 100% on board with this. The one I'm really looking forward to, all of them are great, but there's the one at the end. If you look at the best practices, student-led perspective, not quite sure how that's going to look, but we're going to spend time having students come in and share their thoughts and how they learn best and what type of things they're doing in different classes and that they're really responding to. So as that develops, I'll share with you and what that might look like. And the last thing I wanted to comment on is actually, I did want to clarify. It does say 10-9, and on the end it says PM, Social Skills Improvement System. That's not what we're doing. That's our first professional development day. On this upcoming Thursday, we're going to spend an hour doing that. That is what we call our SSIS, and it's kind of a global screening system where you take a bunch of different information with all of our students, whether it be attendance, behavior, academics, NOEA scores. You put all that together and you break it down by percentages, and it highlights students that are in need. That way we can focus on those specific individuals, doing response to intervention, tier 2 and tier 3 interventions if need be. So that's the SSIS, and we're going to be doing that on Thursday. That's our first hour. And then on 10-9, that's when we were going to break up into departments. And I did want to clarify at the bottom where it says OMS enrollment. Again, I want to keep you updated as far as the enrollment. It was really disappointing to see that I was thinking it was 180 students, but when I talked to our administrative assistant, the number that I had last time, that was because there were students still in there that hadn't been taken out. We knew they were gone, but we didn't receive the official paperwork from the other schools, and now they've come out of our system. So we are at 173. Those numbers are accurate. It is more than we left off last year at 170. Questions?
Great. I had just one question, comment. The University of Maine Orono Middle Partnerships is great. That's always been one of my hobby horses, but just want to make sure you and Jeff Owen at the high school, Jeff's putting some time and energy into that too. And I mean, Reg can correct me, but I think there was some intention that partly be a resource across K-12 as well as.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that. Okay.
So it's probably worth at least closing the loop and
Yeah.
having a conversation about.
Yep. I'll make a note of that now. Yep.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I really have a question, just a comment. I want to kind of applaud the piloting of the Remind app for at least 2 of the sports teams. I think that's an area where we can clearly improve, and if it works, I would encourage not only extending it to all of the sports teams, but maybe looking at extending it out to high school as well. It seems that's an area that we could definitely work on improving, is getting information to parents, which often either doesn't come or is very scattered. So I applaud taking a step there.
Yeah, and from what I've learned, it seems pretty simple. So why not take advantage of it?
A lot of the teachers at ASA are using it, and it
Okay.
couldn't be any easier. And the bar's pretty low in terms of communication coming, so any step up is a good thing.
Okay, great.
One other, just more on a comment, but your goals with the social studies curriculum mapping and the math, student growth with math, I mean, those are great, and those obviously belong in-house at OMS for some time, but just just want to encourage you to think about the right time maybe to bring those to curriculum committee and let everybody else know what's going on too.
Okay, great. I'll make note of that.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Anything else? All right, Reg?
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to commend and acknowledge Elias Veyu, who was named a commended student of the National Merit Program. He just missed that cutoff, I think, by about a point, and so he was acknowledged as a commended student. I also want to mention homecoming was a big success last week. We had a lot going on every day. Great turnout at the bonfire, great pep rally, and so it was really student-driven and student-organized, corralled by Heidi Clark and Kim Emerson, and so they did a great job putting together a homecoming committee of students, of about 30 students, and so I definitely want to acknowledge that. Busy week next week with parent-teacher conferences on Tuesday and Wednesday, and also on Wednesday, we'll be administering the NWEAs to the 9th grade for the first time in a few years. And then 10th and 11th grade is the PSAT. A little concerned about that being our first day back after a 4-day weekend. And so, but we can't do anything about the PSAT for that day. The College Board schedules that. And we're doing testing with 10th and 11th grade, so it seemed like a good day to use that for the 9th graders taking the NWEAs. We've already discussed most of what else was in my report, so I'll leave it at that. Any questions, comments?
I had a quick question. I had a conversation with a high school parent who also has students at the elementary school, and they said their elementary school kids were as excited about homecoming as their high school kids, and they would encourage us to do more to bring that spirit from the high school down the hill a little bit. So if there's any way we can get the student leaders or student athletes to celebrate with the younger kids, that might build some affinity and things like that. In the future.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, what we've done either a year ago or 2 years ago had kids come up to go through the hallways after the hallways were decorated. And I thought the hallways were great this year because they tied in the theme to the fall musical, was Into the Woods. And so each class took one of the fairy tales that's featured in that musical, and so that would have been a great connection with ASA at the same time. So hindsight 2020, but I think that's one thing that we could do in the future, because when we show up that day after they've been decorated, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Things haven't started to descend yet, and gravity hasn't taken over yet, but they looked great this year. So
Yeah.
and then, but bringing students down, I think, to ASA is a great idea too.
A couple kids with soccer jerseys would go
Yeah.
a long way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, or even if they had the same day, like I know you guys had pajama day or whatever, like that was like sort of a whole school-wide, RSU-wide thing.
Right.
That they could sort of connect some of those.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
And Jeff, on that note, Reg and I are trying to start a tradition. Last year, the entire middle school came up to the pep rally on Friday, as did this past Friday. So that's a lot of fun. The kids have a good time doing that. So we're trying to slowly.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anything else? Great,
All right,
thanks.
thanks.
Student report. Anything to report?
Just quickly, wanted to mention that all the sports teams are moving into the second half of their season and getting close to playoffs, which should be coming up before the next meeting, I think. The fall musical is going along. Something I wanted to mention specifically is that the OHS Writing Center is officially up and running. It's this peer tutoring, student-led writing center. Planning was started last year, presented to the board, but it is actually officially off the ground now. It has its own space in the library and everything. And then lastly, I'm not sure if this is the right spot for it, but just a quick comment that there was a thread at the high school a few weeks back, and just a comment from the students that there never was, I totally understand that it's like not an unusual thing, but just considering communication with the students, simply people didn't really know what was going on unless parents were notified, but not all parents shared that with the students. So there was a lot of confusion, and just considering what a process might be in the future to let students know what's going on. I don't know exactly where that goes, but something to consider, just because I know this time there was a lot of confusion, a lot of hearsay.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's something that we did talk about at the time, and made a decision to only do the parent communication. But I think it's something that, what we said at the time is we really want to follow up with students after we get a little space from this incident about what our process is and what our plan is and what we do and why we would do it that way. So I think that maybe would help answer some of the questions that are lingering, maybe if we thought about how we could communicate that with students so that so the students aren't surprised or that the process works the way it does. So yeah, I think that's a good reminder of that to circle back. Yeah. Were you about to say something?
But just, yeah, exactly. It's just, I totally understand that it's something to figure out. It just, I heard plenty of stories of kids going home and their parents being like, you want to stay home tomorrow because of this? And everyone's like, wait, what's happening? Or just conversations about what was happening. People had no idea what was going on, had wrong information. And it just, getting some information to the students so it's not completely just up in the air would help, I think.
Can I address that a little bit? Because I think another part of the conversation that we had around whether we send out an email to the students or not was our concern that would that raise the anxiety level with a number of students who weren't aware of it. And so by sending out an email to all students, would that make things actually worse for a number of students versus kind of calming the fears of others? And so we weighed that and also felt that the way we did it allowed parents to make that choice about would they share the information they got from the school with their child or not. And so, but the anxiety piece was a big part of our conversation. Would we make things worse by raising the anxiety level versus better by informing? So.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that part. I guess what I'm trying to say is just that in the end, it did trickle down to everybody, but it was a trickle-down effect, so it wasn't complete information always, and it wasn't, it would reach a few people and then a few more people, and in the end, everyone did end up finding out, so it didn't save anybody or make anybody not afraid by not reaching people because it got talked about, and I don't think there was probably, nobody I talked to had not heard about it. So I totally do understand those are all legitimate concerns about the process, but I think in the future, at least something, even if it's not immediate, sometime in like the few days afterwards, addressing something to the students. Just because what happened this time is there was a lot of rumor and a lot of hearsay that went around really quickly. Yeah, just something to consider.
Those rumors went beyond the high school students. I mean, middle school students were talking about it. So, I mean, it's again, I would agree with Eli on this. I mean, the concerns are all legitimate, but sometimes when you don't share stuff, it gets out there anyway, and it's not accurate, and it causes more problems than you're trying to avoid, so.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the student report? All right, next up, we have PB requirements. You probably know what this is all about, right? The state required us to switch from the traditional credit-based system to a proficiency-based system for high school graduation. This year's freshman class, I think it's class of 2022, is supposed to be the first class that was going to graduate under proficiency-based. Right now, our policy on graduation requirements is like 5 pages long because it has 2 pages of requirements for everybody who's grandfathered in through the class of 21. And another 2 pages of proficiency-based requirements for everybody who's in the class of 22 going forward. The state legislature very quickly, maybe without extensive consideration, basically revoked the requirement for proficiency-based and now said it's each district's choice whether we want to return to a credit-based system or continue a proficiency-based. Meredith and I were talking about this today. They did not set a deadline of when you're supposed to do it, but to me, it would kind of make sense that since something's going on a transcript at the end of this semester for the current class of 22, it would make sense to let them know actually what their requirements are going to be based on before the end of the semester. That said, the process, ultimately the process is it has to change through a policy, so it has to go through the board. But obviously the faculty and administrators at the high school have a lot to say about this, and we wanted to give them space to have some time and conversation first. And then tonight, we just wanted a discussion, not a decision, so I want to frame it that way. We're not looking for the board to take a decision. We're just looking for the board to hear what the high school has been talking about and give them some feedback and give them a last chance to go through and think about things and then come forward with a formal recommendation, perhaps in November, I think is what we're looking at for the process. So that's the context, is the high school's been talking about a lot. You know, we're looking to them ultimately for a recommendation before we take a decision. Tonight's not a decision. It's just a chance to have a conversation with Reg and to maybe give some feedback or thoughts or anything that we have on that topic. Is that a fair setup, Meredith? Yes. Reg, you want to let us know what you all have been talking about?
So this really was the only item on the agenda for our September 19th early release day, was to discuss PBE, make a recommendation if we were in a position, if we were ready to do that. And so the discussion was framed around kind of a little refresher on PBE, but also what were some of the positives that we've experienced from our work with PBE. What were some of the negative aspects that the teachers considered, or the teachers considered to be negative aspects of PBE, and then asked to make a recommendation, and then justify that whichever way, if we are recommending to go with a proficiency-based graduation requirement or credit-based graduation requirement, support that around why is this, how does this improve student learning, and why is this best for students? And so it was a great discussion. We took all 2 hours to talk about it. I'll start with the recommendation. We took a straw poll pretty early on in the discussion. I think we just kind of stopped and someone said, can we just see where we stand before we start arguing the merits of one or the other? And so we wound up taking a straw poll, and it was a majority, maybe 2 or 3 abstentions in favor of a credit-based system. And I'll just go with some of the rationale that emerged from the discussions. And again, these were framed from both the questions, how does this improve student learning, and why is this best for students? I'll just read some of these bulleted items. The first kind of sentiment that if graduation standards are truly high standards, then students with disabilities or learning difficulties are at a disadvantage in a proficiency-based system. So I think that's one of the issues that was coming up at the state level, was recognizing that if these are truly high standards for all, we have a significant proportion of students with disabilities or learning difficulties that probably won't earn a diploma under this system. The belief that a credit-based system actually maximizes instructional time, given the amount of time that standards-based requires around reporting, record keeping. Teachers feel like that impacts the time that they have to spend with students, either after school, study halls. They think a lot of that time would be used up with some of the record keeping piece. Belief that there's more flexibility in instruction. It allows teachers to address a wider range of standards versus just the kind of the core that have been selected as the graduation standards. There was the fear that as these become higher stakes around earning a diploma based on these graduation standards, more classroom time would be spent just teaching to those classroom standards, and we would lose some of the breadth that we currently have, teaching the main learning results or the Common Core. So the belief there's more flexibility with assessment, that kind of proficiency-based lends itself to common assessments for students and a common rubric, and that doesn't always fit the need of all students, and so there's more flexibility with assessment under a credit-based system. Even though colleges are adapting to standards-based transcript, there's a belief that a lot of parents and employers desire and better understand a credit-based transcript. There's the belief and the feeling that meeting the standard or being proficient sets the bar too low, that once students kind of meet that bar, there isn't as much incentive to exceed the standard that a grade-based system offers, at least for the high achievers and higher flyers. And then one of the last ones has to do with transfer students. I may not have worded this great, but when deciding which classes are required, transfer students are at a disadvantage in a proficiency-based system. And so whether a student is coming in from Bangor or Brewer or wherever, or transferring out of Orono, if we're just looking at standards that are met and trying to match that to the course that would best kind of meet them where they are, it is difficult when all the surrounding towns have different graduation standards. So there was just a question around transfer students that is more difficult under a proficiency-based system. So I think those were some of the highlights around a recommendation and the rationale behind that recommendation.
And where we left that meeting is that, we were going to communicate this information tonight, and the board would discuss it, and we would have kind of one more opportunity for the staff to, after having some time to reflect, to kind of do a final check-in with them. I think also we have a curriculum meeting coming up in about a week and a half, and that seems like an important group to kind of give the same information and gauge their reaction as well, since that's kind of the K-12 representative group. And so that's what we had talked about, of a process that would ultimately maybe result in bringing this back to this board with a formal recommendation by the 1st of November, the early November meeting.
Just two quick things to add. Meredith saved me, actually. I guess the class of 21 was partially moved in on PBE, and then it's class of 22 that's fully, so just to correct that mistake I made. And the other thing I just wanted to point out is this might be something we would normally roundtable, but the mics aren't working back there, so I don't want this to feel like Reg is in the Inquisition, and also, conversely, I want Heath and Darren to feel welcome to jump up and contribute as well. Overall, I think that recommendation makes sense to me, and not that it would have to. If the teacher said we really should stick with PB and the community wasn't there yet, I'd be game for trying that, but I do think it aligns with where the community, by and large, that I sense is at as well. And another, you weren't mentioning it, but one thing that kept running through my mind is kids who move in and out of state as well. Imagine that, and there's a fair number of them in this town. So a couple questions I have. I think things parents are going to wonder about is grade reports and transcripts. So are those going to look just like they did 2 years ago with a pure credit, or is there going to be a flavor of PB that's still on them, or?
I think the transcript in my mind would remain the same, and so
Remain the same as current years?
Current,
or
yeah.
just credit-based?
Yep.
Okay.
One of the issues that we were actually having around the PBE is that Web to School did not work in a PBE framework, especially with a dual system. So we had this secondary system that we were using to track PBE, so it didn't interface with what we had Web to School and transcripts as it is. That was going to be something that had to be, figured out if we were continuing. So that has remained unchanged.
And how about grade reports that go home after every quarter or semester?
They would stay the same as they are now at this point. I think that would take some direction from the board if they want, if you guys wanted to change what's reported home to families.
And again, staying the same, we hadn't got the PB on them yet, so it'd just be a credit-based report.
Yeah, so a grade and, the student rubric, so there's a score on
The 1 through 4s.
responsibility and respect in the
Yeah.
classroom, so.
I mean, I certainly don't feel any push to change that, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to be clear on what those were gonna be, because I know those are the questions I'm gonna get.
In that change, the separation of, student behaviors in the classroom, the respect, the responsibility was a result of work in PBE. And one of the premises of proficiency-based is to separate the achievement from behavior and attendance, participation, all that. And so that is a byproduct of some of the work that was done in PBE, was that reporting separately of behavior and trying to take that out of the achievement grade.
I mean, this is probably the easier direction to communicate, but at some point, once the final decision's taken, we'll have to communicate back with the parents again. It's
Yeah.
probably easier to just say, never mind, than it is to say, everything's gonna change and you won't understand things for the next 2 years. But, yeah, we'll wanna make sure that that's
Yeah.
done proactively too. Jeff, did you have?
Yeah, I'm really happy that the staff has come out in favor of this. I think this is going to satisfy parents in the community a lot more. It makes more sense to students. I'd encourage you, as you go forward, to keep in mind the really robust graduation requirements that Orono has right now, which exceed the minimum
Right.
state standard, right? So just going back to the credit-based diploma law doesn't really mean we should regress back to the lower standards of the state. I think we should keep our students high. The other thing that I'd be interested in is I don't want to throw like all the good work out that the staff has done. So I think
Yeah.
that maybe there's opportunities in the graduation with distinction program and some other special programs to maintain some elements of the proficiency-based education projects that have been begun. But yeah, so thanks for sharing that with.
Yeah, our focus this year on just our building-based PD is around assessment practices, which is an element of PBE, and so we're working on that all year to have a common language and understanding of what best practices are around assessment at Orono High School, and so I think that's just going to be part of our continuous improvement. So, because our discussion did include a lot of positives that came out of the work around PB. A lot of it was the curriculum work that was done, the collaboration, the conversations that happened within the high school, and then a couple years ago around K-12, past couple years around K-12. So the teachers also felt there was a lot of positive that came out of it. I think the difficulty came in the last couple of years when and every school was trying to implement it. Bangor, everyone's trying to do that implementation. That's when I think schools realized this is way harder than people realized.
Heath or Darren, any thoughts from the other schools? Doesn't have to be, I'm putting you on the spot, but just want to give you a chance.
Well, I can honestly say that,
Darren, will you come to the mic?
I'm sorry. Just having been a part of some PBE conversations in the past, I think we can validate some of the good things about it through social emotional learning. For example, that idea of separating behavior from academics. There is a correlation between the development of social emotional learning skills and academics, but it was such an onerous process, I think. The whole idea of rubrics upon rubrics in a separate grading system. And as Meredith mentioned, you really have to retrofit an entire SIS system to accommodate that. So I think it's like turning a great ship or something. They didn't quite realize how big a ship it was, or maybe that it was named the Titanic at the time. But I think it had certainly some wonderful characteristics. In my opinion, it was theory that got ahead of the practicality and applicability. And it sounds as if your staff tended to agree with that. Just a few thoughts.
So as far as the middle school goes, last year, we were very much interested in what this was going to look like in the high school, because then it would be coming down our way. We wanted to make sure that it was, if this was fully implemented at the high school. However, we knew that it was still kind of up in the air, and the high school was working on that. So we had open ears, that's for sure, and I think our approach last year it worked nicely, and now knowing where the high school's going, it helps us, that's for sure.
Great, thanks. Anybody else on the board?
Just like to kind of reiterate pretty much everything that Jeff said. And I agree. I think this is the right decision, not only for pedagogical reasons, but also it's a better fit for the community. That being said, I know that there was some really good stuff that came out of the work that's done here, and if we can keep that in play and build on that, while at the same time not going all in, Leo's not here anymore, but not going all in on PVE, which I'm sure right now he's happy about. But I do think there's some positives, and if we can keep that going, I think that would be the ideal situation. So pretty much everything that Jeff said.
Last thoughts, Reg, or do you have what you need from us to go have your final conversations?
No, I think that was good.
Okay,
It's helpful.
great. Thank you. Thank you for all the work that your staff and you have done getting us here in all stages. So next up is facilities. I'll just warn the board, this is probably going to be our longer discussion item. Meredith and I broke it out into at least 3 or 4 questions we need to talk through tonight. So just prepare yourself for that. Do you want me to frame it, or you want to frame it?
Go ahead, I'm getting my notes out.
All right, so as you know, we've been working with PDT. We hired PDT to do initial, I forget what they call it, planning study, initial study. That was, I think, a 40K contract or something in that ballpark, and we're nearing the end of that time frame. We have been talking about going to a bond vote, whatever scope and scale it might be, not to presume anything in particular about that at the moment, but in June of 2019, so the end of the school year. And so we're starting to look more seriously about the process that bridges us from here to there. So I think there's probably 3 or 4 topics. One topic is just getting to the end of the plan, which is, you'll hear when we go into the details on that, is probably by November. There is the process spanning us from November through March and April, and then the bond vote. Getting some buy-in from the board and some feedback from the board about that. There's how we pay PDT to continue to help us through this process. And there's also, well, I should just mention that I think Meredith and I are thinking that the next board meeting, the 16th of October, is going to be, we might have a half-hour board meeting or 20-minute board meeting to do any hires or anything necessary, but we're basically going to do several hours of discussion about facilities. PDT is going to be here. We're going to invite the facilities committee to come, and we're going to have a big discussion. I mean, that's the primary focus. So it's kind of where we're headed towards. But getting towards there, the board did a prioritization exercise. But I think the board and the facilities committee actually had some conversations about money and taxes, but I think it's time for the board to start having that too. So we got the short-term timeline, the long-term timeline, paying for PDT in the long-term timeline, and then they're starting to have a money conversation, or the 4 conversations.
Those match my bullets.
Perfect. All right. So short-term timeline. Actually, I probably don't have every date, so why don't you go with that?
So if you kind of back up in your mind to look at the deliverables that were expected in the facility study, we've received probably a little, I'd say about 60% of the deliverables. The last 40% is going to come very quickly here at the end in terms of what they're going to show us at the next board meeting, which will be some just broad schematics showing us kind of what they see as possibilities based on the priorities that they see have emerged in the project, and they're taking into consideration, our feedback and all of the review of information that they have done. So the October 16th will be a pretty big night for the remaining 40% of all of those deliverables. Along with that, they will give us some cost estimates, some kind of broad ranges that some of certainly the public is invited to come to the October 16th meeting, but after the October 16th meeting, to have another really forum that we really try to promote public attendance, where PDT can share this information with the community at large and solicit some feedback for us to hear and kind of consider as we go into mid-November board meeting, to really think about the direction setting that the board is going to give PDT around where we want their work to continue. And this is all tied up in the discussion that Brian said we need to start tonight around scope of project, where we see kind of the overall scope of what we feel like the bond amount could be as a range. Kind of tied up with that timeline for finishing is giving some consideration and jumping to the next session, but it's tied up with the public forum of depending on what we decide to do around contracting with PDT to move forward into the next phase of work. One option for doing that would be to utilize some of our capital reserve, which would cause us to have a kind of a town meeting style vote on a warrant article that could be accomplished at that forum on November 8th. So we've talked about trying to coincide those two nights, or those two purposes together into one evening where we have the community out. So really, October into November is the timeline for finishing up the study, them getting us a final report, and then the board really considering, so what are we going to do with this information? Because if we do plan on doing a June bond referendum, the work that PDT needs to do to get us ready for that has to start as soon as possible. When we were talking initially, we were saying, we could have a community forum and get some feedback and make a decision by, December into early January, and they said, no, we need that information sooner than that to get the kind of detailed work done that you will want done leading into a referendum. So that's why we're really trying to move forward the final stages of the study to happen by the end of November. I don't know if you have anything to add to that part.
Yeah, I mean, just to recap, we're looking next board meeting, October 16th. That's basically the board meeting. Having a public meeting, we're looking at November 7th or 8th. I think we're preferring the 8th. But having a big public meeting, which would have a presentation from PDT, it might also have a vote on using some of the reserve. And then the board meeting on November 13th, we would, at that point, we would have gotten at least one round of iteration with PDT, public feedback, and at that point, really, we would be looking to exit the plan stage with a scope of work. We're doing the gym at ASA. We're not doing the gym at ASA. We're doing the gym at the high school, or cafeteria at the high school. We're not doing the cafeteria at the high school. We're doing, right, so broad brush scoping, right? And so that's the short term. Those 3 meetings, 2 of them are board meetings, so they should already be on your calendar. The other thing to note is this November 7th or 8th meeting. We're still trying to finalize that with PDT and a couple of other things. It also means we'd be signing warrants for the board meeting, for the public town meeting, if we do that at the October 16th. But so those 3 meetings are going to get pretty intense facilities focus over the next 6 weeks. But that's what we're looking at. That takes us through the plan, and we come out of the plan with a scope of, this is the ballpark amount, this is the scope to a reasonable, not to the level of outlets, not to the level of exact ADA, but kind of fairly big picture items. The list of 11 items we're talking about, that we're scoped at that point. So that's the intention. And then there's the longer term process, which I think, well, I'll just say I don't think we had a clear communication and understanding with PDT about exactly how intensive that was, but makes sense that if you're going to go to a bond, you want to have done the homework, that you're really going to come up with a number that's going to work. You're not going to, go in and find out you got $1 million of asbestos to deal with, or something like, or that the ground is too soft and there's no way to put a performing arts center where you plan to put a performing arts center. So that's that next phase, that longer term phase. It's going to take us to March, or start after the November 13th board meeting, And PD, that's mostly, well, we'll talk about that phase. But any questions about the short term, get through the plans, the end point of the plan?
Are we at in any way, shape, or form concerned that a June 2019 date for a bond is too ambitious?
I think that's a conversation we could have. I'm sure PDT would be happy. They wanted us to have a fall bond vote, and I told them I don't actually believe that's consistent with town municipal statutes, but it's certainly not consistent with municipal tradition.
Right.
So we can have that conversation. As of this moment, PDT says they can deliver, and it's my belief we could do it. But the thing PDT emphasizes is not so much about the logistics are doable. We can get the necessary planning, we can get the necessary bonding lined up to do it, but the political question, right? If the question is the town ready, or do we need more time to bring the town along? And that's a valid conversation to have.
I mean, my initial reaction, it's only initial reaction, I think we do need to have the conversation, is that I have no doubt that it could be done, but if that's, I'm far less certain that that's the best course of action for us. I'm not trying to slow the process down in any way, shape, or form, but I don't want to rush it either. And I'm a little concerned that June 2019 would be moving faster than we should be. But I just want to have that, make sure we have that discussion.
Yeah, no, we could probably, now is as good a time to, my first take is we should get through the November 8th meeting,
Right.
get some initial public feedback and kind of see where we're at there. And at that point, we'll also, by the November 13th meeting, we will have a ballpark number that we can start to float around town and start to get some reads about. And so I guess my proposal is maybe in December, we need to have, come back to that question of,
Okay.
do we think starting to sell now and having detailed plans to sell in March or April is too fast, or do you agree with me, Mark, that we're looking at June 2019 or June 2020? I think there's an in-between option.
I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I'd have to look at kind of town charter, et cetera, but I don't think that a November ballot issue certainly wouldn't be consistent with what I've seen as kind of town practice. That doesn't mean that we couldn't do it. It also doesn't mean, I don't know, maybe a March of 2020. I don't know whether that's doable or not either. I mean, we have three election dates.
Yep.
Which ones are eligible and not, I don't know. But generally, June tends to be the more common one, right?
Yeah, it's yep. And it's a different question, but I've been told that we cannot have, if we have a vacancy on the board, we cannot have an election for school board on the November ballot.
Yeah.
So that makes me think the referendum, the bond could not go on the November ballot either, but March might be an option.
Yeah, I think it would be, and I think it'd also be something not only to check with the town on, but we'd want to check with the Secretary of State's office just to make sure what our options are. So I think June would be the more common one. That being said, I don't see any reason why March wouldn't be an option, and I don't know that November wouldn't be either. It just would be somewhat abnormal.
Yeah.
So.
It's gonna, not to be too political, but you're gonna have very different
Yes.
electorates at each of those
Yep.
As
Yep.
well.
Mhm.
I would just add into that I feel like there's some momentum that's been built with the study and interest, and I think we have to balance the timeline for feeling like, is this too aggressive are we slowing it down to the point that we lose some momentum as well? So I think we do have to balance those two items. I think if I could decide when we were having the referendum, it would probably be September, October next year, but clearly that's not possible. So I can check into some of these questions about the November, March elections and see what's possible to give us kind of more information to discuss.
Yeah, I know this is an open mic, so I'm not really trying to pull a fast one on PDT, but let's not talk to PDT about deferring the bond when they're up here in 2 weeks, because Meredith and I have been trying to light a fire under them, and I feel like the fire just got lit. So
Okay.
my personal thought is we should revisit this question in December. We'll have some numbers, we'll have some public interaction at that point. And then Yeah, my first thought, which I 100% reserve my right to change my mind pending new data, is that, like Meredith said, we have some momentum, and especially if we have to wait till March or June, I fear we're going to lose more momentum than we're going to increase. But mostly, I think we should just revisit in December if that's okay with everybody.
That's okay with me, and I would like, this, and I appreciate Meredith offering to track this down, what our options really are. Like, in terms of, are we absolutely wedded to June? I don't think we are. So are the other options available? Then we have to consider, obviously, there's pros and cons of each different date, but I'd like to know at least what our options are election-wise, so.
I think the momentum thing is a good point, just from the feel in the school right now, is there is a lot of interest among students about the project right now, and I definitely would slow things, would kill some of that to push the date, especially a full year back.
So Shauna, how many times have the teachers heard facilities are going to happen in the near future?
I would say that if we were a betting group, we wouldn't put any money on it happening by the time any of us are going to be employed.
Yeah, I think both with the community at large and also with the staff, there's some. Anyway, we can discuss it in December, but there's definitely pros and cons on both sides. Okay, so
One other item that I think that we need to consider when we're thinking about dates is there's been a lot of attention focused statewide on the fact that the revolving renovation fund has not been replenished, right? And we have statewide elections for all both legislature and for the governor in November. And depending on the outcome, I believe that there could be significant movement there. That being said, I don't think we'd know what that would look like by, certainly probably not by March of 2019, and maybe not even by June. Hopefully we would be, but what I would be concerned about is if, let's say that fund gets replenished and there's a bunch of different projects in our wish list that we could apply for, would having already committed to a bond preclude us from going for some of these? I don't know the answer to that.
No, we could either go
Could we
for
shift
these.
those funds around in the bond?
Yeah, we could either go for the revolving renovation and do some additional stuff, because I have a feeling we're going to end up penny pinching on all that
Oh,
kind
for
of
sure.
stuff.
There's going to be stuff that we want to do and need to do that we're not going to be able to do.
The other alternative is just because we have the bond vote, we don't have to take the full value of the bond.
Okay, so we
So
don't.
we could go in saying it's a X $1 million bond, and then we could find out the revolving renovation fund is available to us in the middle of May.
Okay,
And we can say we commit, we can't change the warrant articles at some point, but we commit that we're actually going to apply for the money. If the money comes in, we'll reduce our bond
Oh.
by
okay. That's good to know.
1 million or 2 million or whatever we got out of the revolving rent. So I do think we have options, but
Okay.
you're absolutely right. That's another reason probably weighing on the side of maybe deferring
Yep.
until we know depending on how it goes, we could even have applied and know whether that's coming back or not before we have a bond vote in
Yeah,
June,
that'd be ideal.
or at least be down that process.
The other thing that I think PDT is going to talk to us a little bit about on the 16th is, two things. The concept of, phasing projects. And so if there are items that may hold promise for revolving renovation or some other kind of state funding, to kick those down the road a bit to see, what could be found from those sources. And I think they're also going to have an interesting concept to share with us around some idea of segmenting projects to maybe position ourselves to have one of our schools ready to be a competitive school construction project applicant. So they have some interesting ideas to talk about as they look at the project and possibilities for how we can accomplish the many needs we see with, a limited scope of what we can fund locally.
And we're going to get that in 2 weeks from now.
Maybe we should just pause and let people put that in their thinking cap for the next 2 weeks. Is that okay?
Sure.
I think,
Oh, that's
well, they're going to
interesting.
at least present the option. If I'm reading the tea leaves, I think they're going to recommend, although it's our decision ultimately, that we not put funds into the middle school and take an approach that we're going to apply for school building funds for the middle school. Who knows how many years down the road that is. That's going to turn into part of the conversation. But that is an option, and I think they're looking at that. They themselves are looking at that option pretty seriously. I'm a little less sold on that option, so there's a whole conversation to have around that. But you might want to start thinking about your thoughts on that particular view.
I mean, I understand we're gonna get this in 2 weeks, so I'm not trying to jump the gun, but when they present that as a possibility, are they gonna be presenting us with, like, possible construction location plans? Have they thought that out, or
I don't think they're gonna
no?
be at that. That's part of the scoping. I think they wanted, before they did kind of a final scope, they wanted to get feedback from us about which way to go on
One
that.
of the things, again, I find incredibly valuable, and in this district, and that other districts don't have, is we've got all 3 schools in one central location. I would
Yep.
be very hesitant to give that up. So,
Yep, agreed. And they did check, as far as the school building funds, they will allow us to, even though the buildings are connected, they understand it's a separate school, and so they will allow us to, invest and bring up the high school and not have that count against the middle school.
okay.
I mean, I think the main argument is the middle school was built in 1938, which is way past any reasonable lifespan for a building.
I would say so.
So, and the pipes in the walls and a lot of things, the ability to insulate the building. There's a lot of things where the building's limiting. I have a little bit, just personally, a little bit of a contrarian view that that building's the most well-built building in the entire district, so why is that the one we want to tear down? But I'm sure PDT is going to give us some expert opinions on that. I also just don't know if school building is a realistic option after we've taken out a large bond. We still have to contribute money towards school building, so is my understanding. It's not 100% state paid, so. Pretty minimal amount. It is, yep. So anyway, these are all going to be issues we're going to have to weigh pretty quickly. I mean, PDT's by November 13th, we're going to have to weigh that out. So
June 2019.
yeah, that's a fair point.
But I feel like so much of this is all dependent on what PDT presents to us next week. Is there something that we actually have to decide tonight that we want to have ready for them? Because I feel like they're like that present, we keep sort of guessing, and that we should see what they're actually going to present.
16th should be the presentation we've been waiting for. But the 2 big questions are going to be middle school, what to do with the middle school, and how much money are we willing to spend? And we're not gonna finalize that answer until we hear how much things are gonna cost. But I thought the board should start, getting their heads in gear on that so that we can really have a hardcore discussion and bring your questions for PDT. That's really mostly what it comes down to on the middle school. Be prepared to bring your questions to the 16th meeting on the 16th. And the money, I think definitely don't want to take a decision tonight, but we just need to start refreshing our minds about what the cost implications of things are so that we can sit there, and when we hear that, this component's going to cost $5 million and that component's going to cost $3 million, we have some sense of reality about where we're headed.
Brian, in anticipation of that, could we get you to resend that information that you compiled a while ago about different terms and links and amounts and all that? I'm sure I have that table somewhere in a pile at home, but the chances of me finding it are probably pretty slim.
I'll resend the links. I also, when we get to that part of this conversation tonight, I was just going to give you a quick recap. I've got a little table. I was going to recap on that.
Okay.
All right. So once the plan's done, and maybe we hit November or October and we say already we want to put the brakes on. So I think we need to keep that as an option, but let's not talk about that next 2 weeks from now while PDT's here, please. Once the plan's done, whenever that is, we need to turn the corner, and we've handed, at that point, a lot of the work, well, I was going to say a lot of work's PDT, but PDT needs a lot of help from us. So at that point, we turn the corner from scoping to actually designing, and they develop detailed schematics. They develop the front views, right, the pretty picture of the front of the schools to help you sell it. And they do all of the contingency checks about asbestos and PCBs and soil tests and all those kinds of things, so that by April, we'll have schematics, floor plans basically. We'll have floor plans, we'll have front views, and we'll have a very detailed costing, and we'll know if there's any contingencies out there. And, if we keep on the fast track, we'll have that by April. And that point, we'll be ready to start talking to the bond people. Meredith and I've already talked to the bond people, and we've determined that that's a reasonable time frame to go to the bond people with a number. So at that point, if we stick on the fast track, that's what that schedule looks like. But that, switching from the scoping to the planning phase, I think the proposal that Meredith and PDT and I came up with is we would create 4 committees. So we would have a sports facility committee, a performing arts committee, a middle school, high school building committee, and a ASA committee. Is that right?
Yes, I think the athletic field, did you say it was also kind of the,
Parking and
kind of
traffic
the
flow.
and
Yep.
exterior, grounds consideration also?
Yep. So we would make 4 committees. Each committee would probably be chaired by a board member. We'd have to figure that out. We would probably pull in the members of the facilities committee into those committees, and there's probably some obvious connections already. We might want to pull in additional town members as appropriate. We're thinking 5 to 7 people. We haven't talked about it, but we might want to think about student involvement, or, it's really like reconstituting the facilities committee all over again. So those 4 committees, 5 to 7 people. The administrators obviously are going to be eager to be part of their building committees. And those committees meet every 3 weeks. I think maybe they say every 2 initially, moving to every 3. And they are going to be Skyping with PDT, and PDT is going to be giving them homework and asking questions, and these committees are going to be trying to formulate answers, and at various points maybe bringing those big questions with big cost implications back up to the board. So they are going to be subcommittees of the board.
And that's when, Brian? April?
That's
March?
December through March.
Okay.
Yep. And then we end up with a detailed plan that we're confident enough to have a number and, floor plans and front elevations to show, to sell to the community in March or April. That's what the fast track plan looks like. So does that make sense to the board and then presumably there's a big presentation to the community in March or April. Does that make sense to the board as a kind of process?
Mary, are you confident that all the deed issues and all the ground issues will be resolved by then?
Confident, guarded optimism, I guess I would say. It's really hard to tell. It's in our lawyer's hands right now, and they're working on it. I asked him for an update today, and basically he said he's waiting for an appointment with the person at the state to kind of make the case that he feels like we have. And when he gets that answer, he'll know if we're taking the long road or the short road on this. So hopefully we'll know that in the next few weeks.
And my fear is that, we make great plans, we get a lot of energy built in the community, and then we have to hit some kind of block before we vote,
Right?
Well, we've talked about that with PDT, and they've said that the long road can take 6 to 8 months. And so we're at a timeline now where that would potentially be able to be resolved in time. So it would be tight, but I think we could make it.
I mean, the other thing is I think it's a bit of a parallel track in the sense of, we still want to do these things. We're still going to pay for them. It's just a question of, are we going to have to go buy some compensatory land, or are we not going to have to go buy? So we need to have that priced before we actually go to a bond vote. But to me, I think PDT would have been happy to just wait until this was completely resolved before they drew any floor plans. But to me, I don't know. I mean, we should draw the floor plans. We should figure out what we're going to do, and then Meredith and the lawyers can work the system to make sure we can do it by the nice quick plan or the slower, more expensive plan. But we shouldn't. I don't think we should hold up the design process. We should treat them as parallel tracks. Keith?
Yeah, I had a thought, and I thought this would be a good time to kind of throw it out there, since we're talking floor plans and with this particular option, maybe with the middle school. And again, I think it's good timing, because if you think you like the idea, then maybe we should ask some questions leading up to our future meetings. But maybe it's kind of along with what you were saying, Brian. I do hear, and I know what's going to happen with the middle school if it goes that route. Maybe this is something, the money will come elsewhere. But I hear tear the school down, and it breaks my heart. It is a solid building, but at the same time, I guess I'm a little biased being the principal there. That school has so much history. It was our high school. And you can see the history in the building itself, and a lot of it is hidden as far as throughout the years. And I think a lot of what I say too comes from being present probably 2 or 3 times now when you have past community members, alumni walk through, and just the feelings that you see on their faces as they're remembering different things within the school. I don't even know if it'd be a possibility to renovate, if there's some serious money, wherever it comes from, just to renovate it, bring that history back. I don't know if there's a portion of the community that would favor that, would like the idea, whether we're adding on and modernizing. We still would with that, but then also at the same time holding on to part of the culture of Orono. I have no idea where that goes, but you said maybe the building would be falling down at some point, so I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, I think. I'm going to blank on the year. I'm embarrassed myself as an Oronite, but the undefeated football team, and there is a lot of history in that building. These are all questions to be bringing to PDT and to the conversation as we discuss this over the next 3 meetings. It's not a slam dunk, I think, in any direction. And in theory, I think school building funds for renovations instead of tear downs are possible. So that's a question we should be asking. I'm going to guess that they're going to say that's not really the best, cheapest approach on that building, because the whole problem is you can't get in the walls and that. But that's a question we should be asking PDT when they're here in 2 weeks, is whether renovation, even if it's a separately funded renovation, is an option as opposed to a tear down and rebuild. Because like Mark said, it's kind of hard to do a tear down and rebuild, right? Where do those kids go for a year or 2 years? And I do not want the school to end up down on Kelly Road or Stillwater or wherever it is, so.
In the end, it's what's best for the students, so if it were to be a new school or whatnot, then that's obvious.
Yep, all good questions to bring to PDT. Okay, everybody, again, we may choose to slow down or we may not choose to slow down, but if we go on the fast path, that's kind of what we're looking at, is December through March or April. Every 3 or 4 weeks, we're having these subcommittee meetings, which is involving all the board, and these subcommittees are coming back to the board on a regular basis as they're doing things that have big cost implications. And that. All the same time as we're doing budget. Yep. I know where Mark is headed on our referendum date, but I'm not there yet. Yes, it would be a very busy fall and a very busy spring if we do the facilities. Facilities is just going to be a huge, right? And then once the bond vote goes through, it's going to be more coming down to the administration, but that's another thing to think about. They're going to be very busy on the more detailed plans on where the outlets go and managing the phasing, and yep, it is going to be a disruption for a lot of people over a lot of period of time. Okay. All right, so that next phase, here's the issue. We have to pay PDT for that phase. I don't think they are not delivering. I think they've delivered what they told us they were going to deliver for the final plan. But I think there was a failure in communication to think through how much additional detail between the plan and a bond vote would be needed. So they have sent us a rough proposal, and we would need, if we're going to do this, we would need to be funding it. You want to, I think that's what got mailed out this afternoon, so you all got a copy this afternoon.
So yes, in your packet, there's also a hard copy of the additions and renovations to RSU 26, the proposal. So a lot of this at this point is estimates based on just the preliminary information they have about where this might go in terms of project that happens. So the phase that has to happen leading up to referendum is on the second page. There are fees broken down. The schematic design phase is what would be needing to happen. Really about 60, I think they said about 2/3 of that phase would need to happen prior to a referendum. So, in terms of, this proposal is an estimate of the entire architect and engineering, service that would be needed for a project of that potential scope. So the one phase of schematic design is just one of, 5 phases of work. So the fees that we would need to pay for, the services we would need to pay for really fall in that realm. So that's a portion of the fees that would be due to PDT for this work. And then there's another, so that's 102,000 estimated, and then another 2,000 for pre-referendum reimbursables. It would be mileage and such for the work they're doing on site during that time. And then there are a number of other costs that they've outlined on page 3 for a lot of the testing that Brian mentioned, and studies, and the 6F work, structural analysis, a lot of the kind of hazmat structural testing that would need to be done. So, there's some to be determined elements there. The actual items that are listed, if you add all those up, plus the 102, plus the 2,000, it's 136,000. With the to be determined amounts, it might be around 150,000. We're not exactly sure about that. So this is their estimate that they could provide at this time without kind of more details provided to them about our plans, scope of project. So once they know where our priorities lie and kind of what our frame is for cost, they could nail in more specifically. But we really need to make plans now if we are ready to move into this phase, because we have to figure out where we're going to pay it from, since it's new information. And we have some recommendations to make on that. So I guess first, do you have any questions about this information that they've sent us?
When would this be due to them?
Over the course of the spring as the work is done.
Okay.
Although they did mention a possibility of deferring some of it to the next fiscal year, the actual payment, not the work.
Okay.
Which is a little complicated for us in terms of audit
Audits. Yep.
and where we have services rendered and where we pay them from. So that's another complication with that idea.
Lynn's being expressive without saying a word. But
Yeah,
With,
it's cringing.
yeah. So would this, whatever it is, this 150, would we be able to recoup this out of the bond when, assuming there is one, or not?
What Greg M. said about that is your architect and engineering fees will come from the bond, but anything that's paid and done prior to bond, it's not clear to me that that's reimbursable.
So we couldn't
from the
we
bond.
couldn't replenish wherever we take these funds from with funds from the bond.
Well, I don't exactly know the answer to that.
Okay. I'd like to know the answer to that.
Yeah, we can find out. Do you know the answer to that, Lynn?
I do.
Okay, come on up.
Well, kind of. So there's something about a 6-month window as far as once you get the bond where you can go back and reimburse expenses, but you are taking a risk if the bond vote doesn't go through. You're incurring the expenses before you're voting on the bond. So
Okay.
if that was not to go through, then you are taking a chance of not
So is
being
that
able to.
6 months after the bonds passed?
Yeah.
Not expenses that have been only done 6 months prior. Like, we can go back longer than 6 months.
No, I think 6 months prior to the bond. You can go back and reimburse expenses 6 months prior to the
So
bond.
if we
So
did do a
billing
bond of
date
June
those
19,
expenses, or
we would only be able to.
Yes,
do-
I think it's the billing date.
I'm
I
just
can
making sure.
clarify that, but,
Mid-December.
Okay.
um,
If we could nail that down, that would be good.
probably a good chunk would be reimbursable if it's, from January 1st on. On the other hand, the two main places this would ultimately come from, I think, is, so we still have about 250,000 in our capital reserve fund. And the other place is it would come short-term out of our contingency, which means long-term it comes out of our general reserve fund.
Okay.
So you know, those two places, I don't know that we would necessarily
Okay.
look to recharge those out of the bond anyway.
Okay.
So the three options that, I asked Lynn to investigate, and she really, gave me three options that we had to consider for this. The first is, as Brian mentioned, the capital reserves, which were established back in 2014, when we established the special education reserve and the fuel stabilization reserve. And that, we've used that fund a couple of times for projects. One was the tennis court project, and the other way it was used was to actually help pay for the facility study. And so that's one source of funds, and to me, that's, in my opinion, the most desirable place, because it's reserves that are meant to do the work, the kind of work that we're doing in this project. And I think that paying it back, we either reduce our bond amount by the amount that we're spending out of capital reserves, and that's potentially less of a tax impact. I mean, it's probably an indiscriminate amount of the total bond, but to pay it back would just mean that, you know, we're adding that to the bond, or we can take it out of the bond and pay it out of capital reserves. But I see that fund and capital reserves as something potentially we should look into a cycle every year of adding to be able to do some of the projects that maybe can't be accomplished through our bond and our work that we're going to end up doing out of the study. So it seems to me a good use of the money, and something the community would think is maybe the purpose of those funds to help move this work forward. So that's one option, and it requires us, as I said briefly when I was speaking earlier about November 7th or 8th, it requires us to have a warrant that's voted upon by this board, advertised publicly for 7 days, and then voted upon at a town meeting with a moderator. So we can do that as part of the forum that we have. Option 2 is to use some of our undesignated funds, which would be basically you voting to increase our budget for this year, and us having a warrant with a town meeting and a vote of the entire community. So I think that's probably the most undesirable option, because it, you know, involves having to bring people out for a public vote at a time of year they're not accustomed to doing that, and it just seems like a more onerous process. The third option that we have is to use our current year funds, and we would be drawing into our contingencies that we have in this year's budget, which is about $217,000 if we include the regular ed, special ed, and capital improvement, capital maintenance contingency. But you know, that's just a risky approach to take at this time of year. But it would be something that we could do, and if we ended up getting a situation that's unanticipated, then we would have to go into one of our other reserve account or undesignated avenues if we had a crisis that required
That's probably
money.
the option Lynn wants.
I'm not gonna speak for Lynn. Lynn is not really excited about going into contingency. Did you anticipate that? So those are the three options, and I think I've told you what I think is the most desirable, so.
Yeah, when I first heard about it, I was worried about the optics of going to the town and asking for a vote before we even get to the bond vote. But Meredith I think kind of convinced me that if we're doing it as part of this larger presentation, and it's coming out of the capital reserve, which was set aside for things exactly like this, I actually think that could end up with a positive overall optic of us looking responsible, asking for town permission to spend the money, getting people, you know, not to be too cynical, but a little bit practiced in voting for the schools and thinking about the schools. And so I've kind of come around to think also that the capital reserve, by taking a vote at that November 8th meeting, is probably the way we should go.
I agree. I think that's by far the most preferable of the three. I guess the one area I differ from Meredith, I like the contingency one the least. That scares me. Probably not as much as it scares Lynn, but almost maybe as much. I like option one the best as well, so that would be my direction.
So we don't have to take a decision tonight, but we will have to vote on this on October 16th. and we would have to vote on warrant articles on October 16th. So it would be good to get we're not going to take a decision or a vote, but any other sense of consensus or strong opinions in either direction?
I agree with option one as well.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think capital reserve is there for a reason, so.
Okay. So it seems like we're going to come in, we'll take a vote, and we can change our minds, but
Aaron, did you,
I mean, I have nothing new to add to that. I totally think that the town vote is the way to go to get people's input in that and do the capital reserves.
Can we just have Lynn speak briefly about the wording of the warrant and a couple of options for that? Because that really impacts what we bring on the
Right.
16th.
you have to have them printed.
So there's a couple of ways that we can do it. We can come up with a dollar figure and ask the community to spend that up to that dollar amount, which we've done that in the past. One caution that I have about that is the first time we did that, the tennis project went a little bit over, so we had to go back and do another vote to be able to spend a little bit more. There's an open-ended kind of like that you can do in just this budget year. So you can say any expenses incurred in this budget year for this project. Or you can also say any expenditures for this project in any budget year can be used. It's opening it up a little bit more, but it's not on anything. It would still be designated for this project, and we could do it something to symbol of, like the planning and execution of anything within this project. So there's kind of three ways you could do it. The only concern I have about the first one is I know when we did that before, we did have to go back and do this whole process again to get the little bit extra to finish up the project. So
And the wording we came up with today, with that last scenario you played out, was something to the effect of, for the purpose of continuation of the facility study or implementation of recommendations from the facility study,
Right.
was the wording that was a more open, that may allow this, if it extended beyond this fiscal year, which we're a little bit up in the air about that right now.
Right.
Where we're headed with timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend that it be for all current and future fiscal years, and that it have the wording that, just in case we don't spend it all down on pre-bond, that it have the wording that we can spend it on actual building out of this project as well.
I mean, I would agree, and then given the fact that it seems to me that we're gonna have to have this language nailed down for us to actually vote on next meeting, and that we can't, I don't think, determine this by email, and also that I don't think anybody's looking to add a meeting between now and the 16th. I personally would be comfortable kind of leaving the specific language to Meredith and Brian and Lynn, given, everybody weigh in on kind of what they're looking at, and then leaving the specific language to them to figure out and bring to us on the 16th. And we still have the opportunity to say no if we didn't like it, but I don't want to add a meeting, for sure.
I mean, the other thing I'll just add is Meredith and I are not uncareful about probing future costs, and this 130,000 came as a total surprise to us. So I would be hesitant to commit that we're not going to have another surprise before we get to the bond. I mean, I hope not, and we've done our due diligence again, but this is a big process and complicated process, so I think maximum flexibility is important. All right, that seems like a consensus on that. Okay, I think we've got through everything except talking about dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna read you a couple numbers. And these are just estimates. If we get closer, there's a bond calculator for the state of Maine, and there's other people we could go through bonds, so these are approximate. I would like to say they're plus or minus 10%. They're certainly plus or minus 20% kinds of numbers, but they're approximate. So, all right, so I'm gonna read you 6 possible bonds, and I'm gonna give you 2 numbers for each of these. I'm gonna give you a mill rate and the annual tax increase on a $150,000 home, which is the average home in Orono. All right, so I'm gonna give you 4 20-year bonds, a $5 million 20-year bond, is a 74-cent mill increase, which is $110 per year on an average home. A 20-year, $10 million bond is $1.47 mil, which turns out to 221 if you round exactly. So, yeah, so a 10 million 20-year is $1.47 on the mill and $221 on the annual tax bill for an average home. Sticking with 20 years, a $15 million is $2.21 on the mill, which turns out to $331 on the annual tax bill. A 20-year, $20 million bond is $2.94 on the mill and $441 on the average home tax bill. Okay, two more now that are 30-year. The $15 million 30-year bond is $1.68 on the mill. Yeah, 30-year, $15 million is $1.68 on the mill and $252 on the annual taxes, but obviously for 30 years instead of 20. And a $20 million 30-year bond is $2.24 on the mill, and it's $335 per year on the annual tax rate. That's a $20 million 30-year bond. And the other number I will give you is in July of 2026. So in other words, well, by the time the vote's happening, 7 years down the road, we are going to have our only current actively bond retire, and that's going to take 63 cents off the mill and $95 off the average home tax bill. So we're not going to be able to do a perfect jigsaw. At least so far, I haven't found a way that we can do it where we can just keep the total tax bill flat over the time period. But we don't have to. Depends a lot on how we phase the projects. But as we phase, we can delay the bond payments starting for a year. And if you have the construction that's, you know, a year or two, you start to get to where you're just a couple years away from 2026. And, you know, there's all kinds of budget options that you all are aware of at that point. But things are going to look very different in 2027 than they're going to look at like between now and then, because there is a non-trivial somewhere between the total amount and a third of the amount or a quarter of the amount coming off in 2026, end of FY25. Sorry, end of FY26. July 26 is our last payment. So those are the numbers. The facilities committee had a conversation, and I gave them these numbers. And keep in mind, we had a pretty good cross-section. We had citizens, we had teachers, we had a town councilor, and they were feeling like the 10 to 15 million on a 20-year bond, which is getting up to $200 to $300 on the tax bill, was what they could support. I know these numbers are going to be really hard to talk about, but without knowing what the costs are. But I think if the things we've been talking about, even if we don't get to the bottom of our list, we're probably, I'll be very curious to see what PDT says, but I think we're in the 15 to 20 million range pretty easily. They were telling us that they did a comparable project. Was it Biddeford? Anyway, it was somewhere down south. And it came out, it was just upgrades and a few things here and there for their school system, and it was 28 million. So I think I was optimistic about costs about 10 million, but I think if we do 10 million, we're going to get one or two big ticket items, and that's kind of going to, we'll see what the costs are, but I don't want to presume the cost, but I also don't want us to start thinking numbers without being realistic about what we're going to get for that. So again, I definitely don't want to close this to a decision tonight, and the last thing I want to do is to have some final number that sticks in everybody's mind tonight when it's a very imprecise kind of world, and I don't even want, I want to wait until we hear the cost, but you need to be thinking about those numbers, and I don't know if we want to discuss things in a way that we don't end up at a final number tonight, but I would be open to hearing other thoughts of, in the end, it's not the facilities committee that decides this. I think everybody in that facilities committee was a taxpayer. That's what they were willing to pay, but that doesn't mean that's what the broader community is willing to pay. So we're going to have to make that decision in the end. So I'd be open to any thoughts, but just kind of keep it kind of rangy in general, because we don't want to converge on a number tonight till we've heard more about the costs.
I personally would prefer to wait until we get numbers from PDT.
Okay.
To be a little more specific, but that's just me, and I respect that everybody may not be like.
Yeah, that's a perfectly fine option. We are gonna have to come pretty quickly to some numbers. Well, we could in theory wait till November 13th, but by November 13th, we have to have a number, and if we don't come up with a number till November 13th, we can't get help from PDT in scoping back down. I think my preferred scenario would be to actually come up with a number on the October 16th meeting, so PDT can help us scope what's in and out of that number. And then if we completely blanch in one direction or the other, we can do some revising, but I think it would be good to give PDT a number when we leave the meeting next 2 weeks from now, October 16th. But as long as we're thinking about this and, carrying it around in our heads, I'm fine with waiting. What do other people want to do?
If I'm correct, though, if we go that route, we'll know at least what our rough number gets us.
That's right. If you're sitting here thinking X million,
Yeah.
you can at least go down the list and say, here's what I could buy for X million. Ballpark again, plus or minus 10 or 20%, but yep. Is that what people want to do?
The other thing too that I, at least for me personally, I would be interested in hearing. I mean, I know we've got some feedback already, but there hasn't been a number attached to any of that yet. And before we commit to a number, I'd like to at least have people have the opportunity to say, well, okay, this is, knowing what Jake's saying, okay, this is what this is going to cost. Maybe this is what we're willing to do. I mean, ultimately it's our decision, but at the same time, knowing what community members are willing to do and what they would like to do, given what they're willing to take on, would be important information for me.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I guess I said I'd like to have a first cut number on the 16th of October to help PDT do a little scoping, but that doesn't mean we can't then take that number and what that buys and what's left off the table to the November 8th meeting. And get some feedback and, revisit and readjust the number based on feedback at the November 13th meeting.
I mean, I don't see any harm in talking about it now if people want to do that. I tend to probably be more along the lines where Jake is, but at the same time, I also don't see any harm in throwing ideas around. I would caution us that we don't want to kind of converge on something at this point. So I'm open to either approach or something different. The other thing that I would want to say, but probably won't, would have to do with the schedule, but I think you already know where I'm headed on that, so I won't do that right now.
Well, if you think it changes the next 3 weeks, we should talk about it now.
Well, I'm willing to keep it open. Willing to keep an open mind right now.
Okay.
I would like to wait until I actually have some idea of what costs are going to come back, because I think that helps with sort of prioritizing in your head again and sort of reordering things. But I think this information was helpful to have in the back of your mind while they're discussing those numbers. And then that helps the priority level also.
Okay.
I know next to nothing about the process of securing bonds, how a school goes about securing bonds. Is it more difficult to secure a 20 or a 30-year bond, or is the process essentially identical? You just negotiate the term that you want?
My understanding is the process is essentially identical. We have a couple of options who we can bond through. There is the Maine Municipal Bond Fund, which is a quasi-governmental, and we can go through them, and they're very easy. They have more restrictions. There's some laws about you cannot bond for a larger fraction, more than a certain fraction of your total property valuation, but we're nowhere close, and as far as unless we go above the numbers I already gave you, we're not in danger of hitting that limit. So I don't think there are any practical limits.
Okay.
Once we get a little closer, there's private bonders and there's the Maine municipal bond. My impression is things like Bangor Savings only want to do small bonds. So we're either going to be going with a private bond agency, which is what the town does. They have somebody they like quite a bit that's private. Or we're going with the Maine Municipal Bonding Fund, and they have some stronger restrictions, but to the best of my knowledge, any of the numbers I gave you would be an option as far as the legality or process of bonding, assuming the voters in our town approve it.
I think the information Brian gave everyone really helps you to have some context as you're listening on October 16th about, you know, the preliminary costs for what PDT is going to show us. We've just also had some conversation about, and we're going to have some conversation with PDT over the next week or so, about understanding where we likely are in terms of our scope of project, and thinking about that as they give us estimates, because you can do some of these projects in a range of probably millions of dollars difference, depending on what you're trying to accomplish in that, and what your budget is. So I think us giving PDT some guidance, a little bit of guidance is helpful, so they don't throw things out on the 16th that are way beyond what we would really consider doing or able to do, that can help, that might hurt the project as it's moving forward. So I want them to kind of be realistic in terms of where we are as a board and as a community as they're giving us these estimates, if that makes sense. So that's really why we were trying to have a conversation, but I get where you're coming from in terms of wanting to wait. So, you know, we will just try to give PDT guidance around where we think, you know, something that's scalable, like some of these big projects are quite scalable in terms of what you're doing and where you fall in cost. So, want to give them some guidance on that. So if you have any thoughts around that, that would be interesting to hear.
Just to make concrete what Meredith said, I've always thought a performing arts center was $3 to $5 million, and I believe I got that number originally from PDT. But you will notice in the proposal they wrote up, they had an $8 million, and they said something about, well, this is Orono, they're gonna want a 600-seat performing arts center, that's $8 million. And I think Meredith and I probably said, well, probably we're not gonna want the $8 million version. But Meredith and I are going to have a little bit of a steering meeting with them tomorrow. We're going to see the first set of numbers. So, you know, if you leave the meeting and you have a few thoughts, and you just don't obviously send it to the whole board, but if you have a thought that you want to share with me or share with Meredith between now and tomorrow morning, that might be helpful in our steering them a little bit to get the best possible first cut on October 16th. Does that sound like a reasonable way forward? Okay. I think that wraps up facilities for now. Okay, I was predicting half an hour to an hour. So it's 8 o'clock. Students should feel free to leave, although the next topic I would love your input on. And I think it's going to be a 15-minute topic. So leave anytime you want. Do whatever you want, but if you're on the fence, staying one more might be worth it. Yeah, which means he's less likely to do what I recommend. Okay, so district policy on outside campaigning. Just with an election coming up, it might be worth just recapping in general for everybody. We don't really have particularly policies on this, but the law, most of them are Supreme Court decisions, are very clear on students and teachers. So maybe it's worth recapping that. Students do have free speech rights. Schools cannot infringe free speech rights. There are a couple of exceptions where students can be limited more than adults can. Limit number 1 relates to obscenity and lewdness. And limit number 2 is disturbing the educational program. But the court has been pretty clear that's a very high standard. And in particular, it would have to be a disturbance from the student with free speech. The argument you hear about, well, he's walking down the hallway with a controversial political slogan on his shirt and that's going to start a fight. That doesn't cut it for stopping free speech. On the other hand, I don't know, the KKK having a rally, even if it was students of KKK having a rally, that probably cuts it for causing a substantial disturbance to education. But it's substantial and high likelihood of disturbance. But barring those couple of areas, students have free speech rights if they're expressing political slogans, talking to their friends, wearing shirts that aren't lewd. Those are all within the rights of students. Staff, outside of their job, have 100% free speech rights and campaigning rights. On their job, well, let me back up. There's a distinction between teaching and campaigning, and it's in the policies of this district that teachers should be teaching the issues of the day. And as far as I'm concerned, everything that's happened in this area has been fantastic. So I don't want teachers to start to get nervous about what I say about limits on teacher speaking. That's just mostly about their personally campaigning for a particular candidate. But teaching to a topic, excellent. I love it. We're trying to create civic beings coming out of these schools. Please keep doing it. Probably I would say please keep doing more of it. As long as there's an effort to present both sides and to focus on teaching critical thinking, we're golden. You know, if it's only presenting one side and it's telling a student what to think, that becomes campaigning. But I've never seen that as a concern, and I don't have a concern about that with our teachers. So teaching both sides and teaching critical thinking, please keep doing it. Teachers campaigning, they're not allowed to campaign during school hours. They're not allowed to use school facilities to campaign, but outside of school hours, they're welcome to do, they're regular citizens welcome to do whatever they want. Anything you would add to that, Meredith, in terms of those qualifications? No. Those are all pretty much laws and court case decisions, so that's not a question of board policy. That's just what's in the laws, mostly, as I say, as court precedent, but those are laws too. So those are really not debatable. There's a couple gray areas about what teachers can do. Like whether they can wear a campaign button or not. I'm not personally at this point in time concerned about that as a board member. But the one thing I did want to get a sense from the board about is, as long as we're content neutral, in other words, we do the same thing to the Democrats and the Republicans, to put it in very blunt terms, we do have a choice about campaigning on our grounds. We can allow it or not allow it. And I was at least one football game where one candidate, not the candidate himself, but the candidate's representatives were on the grounds passing out literature. And I don't know if the board, and I think that's only going to accelerate as we head towards the November election. So I'm just curious, and we have no policy, but we could adopt a policy on this if we wanted to. I'm curious what the board's thought of. We have to be content neutral. We either allow it or we don't allow it. But although we can put constraints about disturbing the public and lewdness and some other things on candidates too, but basically we're allowing it or we're not allowing it. And I'm just curious what the board's, it is going to be an issue because it's already happened. I'm curious what the board thinks about that.
Quick clarification, you're talking about campaigning from outsiders or from students?
Outsiders. If a student is campaigning, they are not allowed to disrupt. So most courts have interpreted that means actively campaigning as opposed to participating in a class discussion. You're allowed to do something non-disruptive like wear a button or a t-shirt, but actually, certainly interrupting a teacher is not allowed. Most cases, handing out pamphlets in the middle of a class or in the middle of the hallway is usually, the courts have been allowed school districts to interpret that as disruptive as well. But, after school, those kinds of things, students have free speech rights. And we can't take those away.
And the question you're bringing up is about
So
outside?
these are outsiders from a campaign who are, I think the law on the staff and the students is pretty clear. These are outside people who are, let's just call them community members. They're not staff or students.
Got it.
So and I think the venue you're talking about is attending a public event. So,
Football game, standing outside an entrance before school starts.
Yeah. So that's the venue that you're talking about.
Right, they don't have a right to come in the schools. That's not going to happen. But yes, public spaces at public times, but on school grounds. This is content neutral. I don't have a particular agenda politically. I think my own personal opinion is there's pros and cons of allowing this to happen on school grounds. I certainly have already said and believe I want to encourage students to be civically engaged. Exposing them to the election process is probably a good thing. I have to admit that I'm a little bit colored by the nature of the event that I observed, where they were not really honest. I was approached saying, do you want a football guide? And I said yes, and what I got handed is something that had like 3 referee signals and then campaign literature, so they were not really honest about it. I don't think exposing students to that is necessarily something we're obligated to give our grounds and money towards doing. So, you know, you can imagine a very high-minded situation where both candidates are represented and they're handing out very useful brochures and information, and some of our students are going to be able to vote in the November election, and they're getting information, so you can imagine a very high-minded civic approach. You can also imagine some pretty undesirable outcomes from this as well. So at the moment, there's no policy, so I was kind of mad that this guy was lying to the entire public, but there was no policy that I could do anything about it. But I'm just curious if the board, we can just do nothing, but I'm curious if the board has an opinion.
I guess I have 2 questions. One would be, beyond what you experienced, I'm assuming this past Friday evening, have we had a problem in the past at all that anyone is aware of? I'm not, but.
I'm not aware.
And then the other question I have is, I'm always hesitant to make a policy which we can't enforce or don't have the means to enforce, so how would we, like with your situation, how would we enforce that? And who would enforce that, and how would that look?
So, I mean, at that point, if we have a policy that that's not an allowed activity, we own the grounds, it's trespassing, we would ask them to leave. If they refuse to leave, we call the police. I would assume would be an administrator typically who would be the one to enforce that, or athletic director if it's an athletic event. Yep.
It's been the practice in municipal elections for candidates to gather signatures for their petitions at school. It has never, to my knowledge, been disruptive. I mean, people have been pretty respectful of that, and I hesitate to limit that kind of civic engagement. I like making our schools places where people meet and talk about our town. So I worry about that. I understand the situation you're talking about is sort of a few steps removed from local municipal politics, but I'd hate to throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing.
Yep. Sure you have an opinion on this, Mark?
Yeah, I'd be interested.
My general opinion would be that placing any kind of restriction like that is probably ill-advised at best and maybe dangerous at worst. I mean, part of the beauty, I would say, of having a free and open society is you get the free exchange of ideas, and you're not going to like all ideas equally, obviously. If you start to restrict some activities, it's a pretty slippery slope, and you can go downhill very quickly. So I am aware of the event that you talked about. I actually could tell you who that was, but I won't. And I have the flyer still. It's on my office desk right now. People have the opportunity to decline that kind of solicitation. They could say, well, no, thank you. They have to have opportunity to take it and look at it and toss it or keep it as they see fit. My sense would be as long as the opportunity is available to all interested parties, and they are not disrupting the event, and it's at a public event, and they're not violating any other laws or town ordinances, then I would tend to say that we allow it. But and so for me, I guess where I would be is my personal opinion is no policy is the best option on this, but that's just my sense. So,
what do the students think?
I would agree that there can be specific issues, but I don't think a policy is needed for this. I think, as you said, there already are pretty clear laws about what's not allowed. But the situation of a public activity, I don't see any need for a policy dealing with that.
I've never seen anything like this happen on school grounds. So I think as of right now, just letting it be, and then if this kind of incident pops up more and becomes more frequent, then maybe reevaluating and coming back to it. But as of right now, I don't see any reason to implement anything.
Seems like there's a pretty strong consensus. I also have a pretty high bar for limiting free speech. So one unfortunate incident notwithstanding, doesn't seem like anybody wants to go down the road of a policy. And as long as we're encouraging use, I mean, they're already not allowed to be disruptive. So I think we're covered at the present time, and we'll just continue to see how things work over the next election season. But I also just think it's good sometimes to be proactive instead of reactive. So I just wanted to get consensus, and I think we have a consensus. All right, next up, we have action items, and students should feel free to leave. I could have sworn we approved all of these at the last.
I don't think so.
No? No? Okay. Maybe I just saw this page last week and all right. So I would make a motion to approve co-curricular nominations of Leslie Winchester and Zach Arnold for the Outing Club, Leslie Winchester for the Freshman Class Advisor, Heidi Clark and Kim Emerson for Student Council, Sean Malone and Emily Jackson Sanborn for the Geek Squad Geek Squad, I'll just say, Don Joseph for the Middle School Assistant Football, and Travis Cole for the Varsity Cheering Winter. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion or comments? All those in favor? Okay.
I'm certainly in favor. I just have a question to ask. If someone's serving in a role and we haven't approved them, is that like they're like serving there tentatively and then we decide no? Is that how that works?
All right, MSMA delegate. So the Maine School Management Association is having a conference, what is it, the 26th and 27th, 25th and 26th, something in that range in October. It's in Augusta. I'm sure you all know MSMA is for board members and administrators, superintendents in particular. I'm planning to go, and one of the things they do is they have boards send delegates to then approve various motions for the MSMA. We can send, I think, is it 2 delegates or a delegate and an alternate? We've never had a board member who went to a conference before, so it's never been an issue. But I think I'm going to the conference if you all want, or if anybody else wants to go. I believe the district would cover the cost, so it's not a question of cost, it's just time. If anybody else wants to go, the rest of the time they have workshops, but Thursday afternoon is delegates. If you all make a motion empowering me to be a delegate for the RSU 26 board, I can vote on behalf of the board. If you don't want to do that, I will just go to the workshops and have fun, so, at the workshops.
I will make a motion that we approve Brian McGill as the delegate to the MSMA proceedings he described as the RSU 26 representative.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Could you just describe like what the delegate does again?
So, it's kind of a legislative body. They vote on motions for MSMA. Oftentimes, I don't have the list in front of me, they're MSMA positions on legislative issues is the most common. I believe occasionally there may be a president of MSMA to hire or something, but I didn't see anything of that nature this time around. It was all legislative positions, and I would be happy to summarize the context and send it out and request for opinions on those issues that we'll be, at least know in advance that we're going to be voting on.
And it's actually the School Board Association side of MSMA that has this representative from each district to be a delegate to the assembly where they're voting on resolutions that will be the positions for the School Board Association to take forward into the legislative season. So, we can share the list of topics and positions that they have that Brian would give feedback on. I'm going as just a member of the conference. I won't be at that. That's just for the school board representative. Sharon's going to one of the days. So if any of you are interested in going as a participant outside of the delegation for the formal role, I can send you the information and you can let me know.
most of the conferences, there's a keynote speaker each day, and it's like a professional development mini university kind of setup. There's workshops from 9 to 10, and they're, the whole range of school board nerd kinds of topics, everything from collective bargaining to what's happening with PBE to, there are all the kinds of things you would think about, so. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstained?
Is anyone else interested in getting the information to decide if you're interested? We'll bring back the information to you.
Full confidence. Take care of it.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jeff. All right, we have 2 policies for first reads. JDLGB, reintegration of students from juvenile correction facilities. This, it turns out, is a required policy. It was not, it must be fairly recently considered a required policy because it was not on any of my lists, but it is clearly on the MSMA list this year. So we need to get this approved post haste. Not a particularly controversial policy, I don't think, because it's just one of these policies that implements what's already in the state law. This was borrowed from, where did you get this policy, Meredith? Anyway, a district in Maine.
I think it was the state sample.
Was it the state sample?
MSMA sample,
Okay.
right.
Yeah, you see a couple changes. We read it in policy committee meeting at the beginning of September. You see the changes that were proposed by the policy committee. They were quite minimal. So this is coming forward for a first read. So I would make a motion to recognize a first read of JLDBG. Is there a second to recognize the first read?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion, questions, comments, or feedback?
The only question I have is, do we have a reintegration team in place? Or is that something we'll need to form? And do we only form it when the situation arises, or does it have to be in place before the situation arises?
Well, it outlines here who would be on that team, and we would convene the team if we had a
So
situation.
it will depend on
Right,
the situation.
right. The student assistance team is already established, so all of the, that's a mechanism that's already in place. And actually, the guidance counselor is almost always on that team, and sometimes the special ed director's on that team, depending on the situation. So it's really just bringing in the parent, guardian, custodian to that situation. So we really already have it, but it would be using it for that purpose.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of recognizing a first read? Okay. Next one is the school lunch payment charge policy. Ben brought this forward. He's put in a place of not having a lot of guidance about exactly. It is not an uncommon situation for a student to be in the red on their balance. Sometimes it's just a case of life is busy and the parents haven't paid. Sometimes it's a case of economic hardship. Probably very rarely is it a case of somebody trying to stiff the system. But Ben felt, and I completely agree, and Meredith also brought this forward to me, that it's not fair to put Ben in the place of making all the decisions about how to behave on that. So this is a policy that would basically give him our guidance and be a source of conversation. This was also discussed at the last policy committee meeting. We made several changes, all of which Ben was amenable to. I can also communicate the tenor of the conversation, which was this district is not looking to make money or, more realistically, even balance the books in school lunches. We would much rather that students are able to go through the lunch line, get a healthy meal, and not feel any sense of shame. And if that's, if we're losing $10,000 or $100,000 a year, maybe that's another conversation, but we're not in that place. That was the overall tenor, so I think we actually, I don't know what direction you want to call it, I'll say soften the policy relative to the model policy that this came from, to make it a little more clear that students will always get a lunch, and that less opportunities for them to be shamed by not being able to pick up what they want, things like that. We got rid of the notion that we'd ever use a private collection agency, and this is the policy that's brought forward. So I would make a motion to recognize the first read on policy EFD as presented. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question here with the parents can choose not to let their children charge meals, but they said they have to send in a letter or email. But how will the parents know that they need to do that? Like, it's not something that they would know about to do if they didn't want them to do it, and then their kids could be charging and they
So
wouldn't know.
by policy and by federal law, a letter goes out in the school packets at the beginning of the year. Mostly notifying parents of the option to apply for free and reduced lunch, but I would assume that that would be the place to notify. We also talked about how that packet, any one paper in that packet tends to get lost, and more for making sure we pick up all the kids who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, that we send that letter out again, probably by paper and by email sometime in, end of September, beginning of October, once things are running, so that important issue of making sure kids are paid, but also parents who are sending their kids with plenty of food and don't want them charging would also be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I would think just because this is new, I would like to see it maybe highlighted on the front, because not everybody, once they scan what that packet is for, I'm not sure everybody actually reads through the whole thing, and if it's something tagged onto the end, I don't think they'll see it.
I actually like it set up this way because I think it errs on the side of the student in case the parent, because if you set it up the other way, where, student goes through the line, oh, well, you can't charge yet because your parent hasn't given permission. And I'm not saying you're advocating for that.
No, I totally agree with you. I like this. I just want to make sure the parents know that they can check. I don't want them to charge, because just my personal experience is I always get a couple charges a year that say you haven't paid this, and I'm like, well, I know my kid has not had any school lunch, so.
Until I talk with my kid.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure that they don't have that option, so I can stick with my story.
So, yeah, I mean, I think more on the free and reduced lunch side, but we did consider this as one of the areas of conversation or communication we want to elevate. So it'll go out in the packet per law, but we also talked about having it go out in September, October, to re-elevate the options for parents around this.
Okay, so one other question, and just to be clear, this is in I, towards the end, students in the free and reduced program are approved by federal regulations for a meal only and cannot choose just milk. So I'm assuming they can get milk, but it's milk with the meal.
They have to take the whole meal, which
seems-
includes milk.
Which seems wasteful if they.
It is wasteful. We talked about that, and Ben said there's no
Yeah,
wiggle room in the policy, so.
I know.
But yeah, so it would be nice if they brought a lunch from home.
Yeah.
But they could get a milk, because they're already qualified, but apparently that's illegal. Talk to your senator and the representatives.
Drink the milk and chuck everything else.
Well, that does happen,
Yeah, I know.
yeah. But that's out of our hands.
Yeah.
Any other feedback?
The only other thing is just a formatting issue. There's a lot of times we have periods at the end of sentences. I don't think we should add periods.
Okay.
Formatting issue. Otherwise,
On the front page, C, students always have the option of bringing their own. Do we want to have bag lunch or just their own lunch? Is bag there?
If it's in a lunchbox, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Bring,
we can
how
work
about
on that,
bring their own lunch from home?
yeah.
It doesn't have to be from home, just bring their own lunch. Yeah.
Take out all the extra.
It's not the bag.
Okay, I will make that change. Any other suggested changes? All right, all those in favor of recognizing the first read? Okay, great. Approval of donation. This is the reverse donation. We're actually donating to the town. You want to describe that?
Yeah, so I might ask John to come out in case you have any questions. So, after the upgrades that we did this summer, we have some surplus switches that are really designed for public government entity use, not for private use. And so we really don't have a way to resell these to a very broad audience. And the town had indicated that they could use, or Sean, I think, and Avi had some conversation based on, our work up here of how maybe these switches might enhance what they have here. So they have asked if we would be able to donate those to them, and Sean made that recommendation to me part of this explanation. So in terms of the value, it was a little bit murky as to what the value is, because it's hard to place a value on something we feel like we couldn't resell, but I mean, the actual value at this time is about $500 or $600 to the right place, so.
Yeah, so these are the switches from the 2013 MLTI kind of network implementation they did, and after talking to the network main, they don't want the switches back. All the access points that were part of that we're holding on to until they either A, want back, or B, it'll just kind of become ours. But as far as the switches go, they've been completely wiped, and they're really ours to use. But with what we did with the network upgrade, with the switches we have now, they're not really useful to the implementation that we are currently using for our solution. And so the town could use them as enterprise level switches to upgrade this infrastructure here.
So I was just looking for policies. We do have a policy on disposal of property, and
Yeah, it's up under the one about business. Right
Yeah, it's like $500 or more value, and that's.
okay, I missed it. I mean, I haven't checked, but have you checked to make sure this conforms with the policy?
It does. The issue is the value as to whether or not it needed to come to the board. And when Sean and I initially talked, he said, well, if someone really had use for these, they could be worth around $500 each.
Yep.
But it's such a specialized kind of configuration that we really can't go out and resell these. So that's why I thought we should bring it here to get your approval for that. So.
All right, I would make a motion to authorize the donation of these switches to the town. Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, approval of stipend position. Darren, I don't know if we're gonna have any questions, but you wanna give us you have to come up to the mic, unfortunately.
So I'll just give some background. Darren has been in conversation with some individuals about starting a coding club, and he's really in support of this project, and it goes along with some of the work they've been doing. And so we looked at the kind of stipend approval, the policy, and the process, and the request here kind of follows the initial first year request for a new stipend. So I'll let you describe it from there.
So I was approached by some parents who are interested in developing an after-school coding club. There is a connection to UMO here. The parents actually have no interest whatsoever in the stipend itself. And Meredith was able to clear up for me that it does not, in fact, actually we thought initially it had to be a staff member, but it in fact does not. We're still waiting to see how that goes. We're tending to feel that we've queried at least grade 5. We thought we would start with that. I think it was 62% of the students evinced interest, and that's just an informal poll. My guess is it might go higher if we advertise that a little more. But at the same time, there seems to be genuine interest. The Fab Lab, this is a connection. It would be done or conducted in the Fab Lab. There's a high level of interest in the STEM approach. So that's really where we're going right now. My personal preference would be if we had a staff member, somebody with classroom management capabilities, who's very comfortable staying after school. So we haven't really opened this up yet, but that's been the proposal thus far.
So I just want to, so this would be a volunteer, and the stipend would be for a staff member who would be present, or?
Presumably, although it could work another way. It's just that these particular parents made it clear it's not about the stipend for them. They simply wanted to avail them, provide their services, which we thought was a great connection. And I think the stipend is not significant, but it might be enough just to get started as a pilot, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, so from a policy point of view, we want to make sure people are either clearly recognized as a volunteer or an employee so that under our insurance umbrella, our liability umbrella, and bound to follow our policies. But it sounds like that's taken care of. And just to remind the board, we had a policy last spring, came out of the stipend committee actually suggesting that we have this notion of an initial trial stipend. And this is, as far as I remember, the first example of that actually coming to the board. So the notion was, in keeping with that idea that we want everybody to be an employee or a volunteer, we would attach some money to it, and it would be clearly communicated that this is not a guaranteed thing for next year, be on a trial basis, and if it works well, then the board can take its decision about whether they're going to put the full money, however much that might be, into it in a future year. So I would make a motion to authorize the stipend for the coding club at Asa Adams. Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion?
So I have a question. When you say, staff member or volunteer, so being an official volunteer would mean that you've gone through the volunteer training?
That is correct.
You had, everyone who would be involved with that would have done that process?
Both of the parents who approached me have already undergone the criminal history record checks and attended the volunteer trainings.
Great. Yeah, I was just going to say, given the amount of time they're spending, I think our policy for volunteers requires SHRC at that point too. So, yep,
They've been through the process, no question.
Darren, I would encourage, I know you said it's not about the stipend for them at all. I would almost encourage them, instead of declining the stipend, to put it back into the program. Like use it to further the program, buy supplies for the program, or...
Oh, absolutely. Although, again, I'm always thinking from a management perspective. Once you're after school, and this is just my own preference, that if you have a school personnel, kids can be, they might want to experiment in ways that are not particularly conducive to education. So we'd want to be sure that somebody was there to help.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would think that the volunteers could use that assistance. So I would definitely agree with that.
Just, once you're on the internet, you know where that can go. So, although we've checked our, we are rigorously vetting our process in terms of media releases and everything else connected with this, and firewalls. I've just met with Sean this morning about something. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, but absolutely.
I would just note, there's money in here for supplies. We're not voting on that because it's on the level at which it's building administrator authority to decide where that comes from. It's $250, but there is a supply budget in addition to the stipend. Any other discussion or questions?
Did we set for that first year kind of trial? Was it $200? Is that what we set? $250. Okay.
Which is what this is at.
Okay.
Yep. Any other discussion or questions? All those in favor? Okay.
With thanks to the two parents who indicated their willing to volunteer.
Great. Thank you very much.
So now we're just down to reports. Policy Subcommittee is meeting this Thursday at 3:30. Per policy, it's probably worth just reiterating, that's a subcommittee of the board. It's open. Mark and I are the elected representatives, but it's open to the public, which includes other board members, teachers. The principals usually show up. Sometimes teachers show up, but it's an open meeting. Two main items. We're going to look at, we're not going to look at political advertisements, which was on the agenda, but we're done with that. We're going to look at IJOC-R, which is scoping out volunteer administrative procedures. So these are volunteers who have more than just helping out in the classroom kind of roles, setting some expectations, and really honestly, much like the conversation with Ben, giving Meredith some guidance, but then conversely some backup about the board says this is how it has to be, so that argumentative volunteers, Meredith can send them to us instead of her having to deal with them. So we already have a policy on school volunteers, but this is going to be the -R or regulation document. And because of the goal, this is going to be not, this is not going to be something in the handbook that Meredith creates, but this is going to be something the board votes on. So we'll have Meredith has found a nice draft version of that. So we'll be discussing that. We will not, as I said, discuss political advertisements. I don't know, we'll formally discuss the policy, but we did say this fall we're going to figure out what we're going to do about surveys. I think we figured out how many and when we're going to have surveys, but we're going to start talking about process for creating surveys and appropriate questions at a minimum on the superintendent survey, but maybe other board survey. Those will be the topics for this Thursday. Next up, we have, unless there's a question, UTC.
We had a meeting 2 weeks ago, and our meeting for next week has been canceled, and it's going to be the week after, just rescheduled. I did talk to UTC Dean of Students and their, I don't remember what Noel's official position is there, about the preferred names and their transgender, if they have a policy about that. They don't, but I sent them our policy just to look at. They said they were really interested in trying to make sure that that's implemented, and that was important to them, so.
I haven't heard anything regarding Spruce in a meeting, although last time we met in the spring, I heard we would be meeting in the fall.
Okay.
I assume something's forthcoming.
Yep. Curriculum Subcommittee, Mark or Meredith?
Yeah, yeah, I think it was just Meredith just kind of updated everyone on what the plan for the year was for curriculum subcommittee. I think that was the bulk of what we did, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, each school kind of also talked about their plans for the year. And much of that has been mentioned in the context of some of the board reports you've heard from the principals. And then we talked about the district initiatives for the year. It's a good meeting.
Facilities Committee, we've kind of been through that. The actual, we should maybe take this off. I don't know that the actual Facilities Committee is going to be meeting anytime in the near future. We're going to be doing a lot of facilities work, but it's not, and many of those people are going to be involved in various ways.
If we get to those 4 different subcommittees, if that's what subcommittees of the subcommittee, are we going to want reports from them every? I mean, that's something to think
Maybe.
about.
Yeah,
I think we
we may
probably
want to.
would, right? So, especially if we're going to go with the accelerated timeline.
Yeah, yeah,
So.
come December or January. It might be a good practice to just get the reports. All right, Wellness Subcommittee, other business? Any? Well, I moved over that quickly. Yeah. Any board members have other business they want to bring up? Any requests for future agendas, items? Any public comment? Our next meeting will be here October 16th in the Orono Town Council Chambers at 6 p.m. We've already invited all of the Facilities Committee to participate in that. This will probably be, we may have a brief formal meeting, but it'll very largely be a workshop format with a presentation from PDT and obviously the administrators are going to have a lot of interest in that. Facilities Committee is going to have a lot of interest in that. And there will be larger opportunities for the public, but the public is also welcome to attend that. Any requests for information or follow-up?
I guess just one, and it doesn't have to be anything formal. It could just be confirmation of what I've seen. But it seemed, I know we've talked a lot last year about crossing guard situation, and then there was a lot of work over the summer on the part of the town and also on the part of administration for possibly improving that situation. Just based on what I've seen, it seems like that's been the case. I think I've only seen one day with a lack of a crossing guard at Westwood and none at the downtown crossing, but I could be wrong. I don't know if,
Yeah, I think
is
it
that
was
your
just the
sense?
early release afternoon, and that might have just been a miscommunication. Yeah, it's been very positive.
That's what I thought, so that's good.
They can make it through the winter.
Yeah, there was it was a tough job today to be out there at 2 o'clock with the rain and the cold.
Very positive and, yeah.
I've seen them fist pumping kids.
Yeah, it's good.
Making a connection with kids.
Yep. All right, no other requests for information. I motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
I meant to send you an email to tell you that Emma wasn't going to be attending. It was on my list